Investment, and also the Special Advisor to the President on the Economy, to thank you very much for making the time to attend this 5th Business Forum, but more so for your commitment to this whole process of engagement to improve not just the business environment, but to improve the economy as a whole. Partnership with the private sector is not merely a policy. It's the only sensible thing to do. And our approach is to engage, to work collaboratively, to take criticisms and suggestions seriously, and to respond. Bureaucratic reforms, and I want to emphasize that issue of taking criticisms and suggestions very seriously and responding. I think that one of the critical things is that there is a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot that needs to be done in the whole process. So many things need to be done. But unless some of these things are pointed out, I mean, they're obviously stuff that we know of and that we are constantly engaged with, but unless some of these things are pointed out, and it really doesn't matter how they're expressed, we're quite prepared to take a look at them and to see how we can respond, individually in some cases, and collectively as a system. But I think it's very important that these things are pointed out, and there is no end to repeating the issues, especially if those issues haven't been addressed. So I really want to encourage that we continue to make those criticisms and make those suggestions, because really our business is to ensure that we make the changes and we do what is required to make this environment make sense for us from the point of view of doing business, and also to improve the economy generally. But I must say that bureaucratic reforms, almost by nature, involve a fair amount of drudgery and frustration. And this, of course, is multiplied when you're dealing with subnationals who operate their own legislation and their own systems. And this is what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to achieve federal government, state governments, local governments interacting and responding in the same way to the private sector. So that, as I said, would involve a fair amount of drudgery and a fair amount of frustration. And I think that we all need staying power to be able to cope with that whole process and to see it to the end. But I think the key is first to recognize that the ease of doing business is first and foremost a people issue. And of course, it's been very rightly pointed out, also a capacity issue. So getting the right personnel in the appropriate positions and all that. Now, that's not necessarily an easy process, because very frequently you have to keep moving or managing in cases where you don't necessarily have the appropriate personnel. But I think we're also committed to ensuring that we improve capacity. And these interactions are very important in improving capacity, in improving the capacity of the regulators. The regulators are there to serve business, and I think that these are very important interactions, hearing what people are saying, and also understanding the perspectives that people have on these issues. And I think, that is also, for me, a very important aspect of capacity building. And that's, of course, aside from the more formal capacity building processes, trainings, and all of that. The second, I think, is to be focused. We really need to be focused, to stay the course. Many times you find that when something, and this is my experience, and I've worked in the public sector for a considerable period of my professional life, and I know that change is always slow, but you must remain focused. You just must remain focused. So we issue executive orders, 4 executive orders so far. And I engaged with civil service. I engaged with senior people in the civil service, permanent secretaries, heads of agencies, etc. And after that engagement, then training down the line. So permanent secretaries training their own people, heads of agencies are expected to train their own people. This is a process which obviously will be long drawn. So even the process of training, okay, so we did some training, and then there was a training that actually bombed out because There were far too many people who attended the training for it to make any sense. So that, I think there were over 2,000 or so people who attended one training. And of course, that didn't work. So we have to redo that and revise it and all that. The point I'm making is that the process of doing any of these things, especially in a public service as large as ours and as diverse as ours, requires being focused and requires a great deal of patience. But the important thing, and I want to say this for all of the colleagues that I'm working with in PEBEC and all that, is that they are focused and determined to ensure that we see this through. And this is true of all of the public servants that we're interacting with, the heads of agencies, and you've heard many of them. And you can be sure that we're on their case and that we're not going to let go until we achieve all of the objectives that we've set for ourselves. The other thing, the third, is the readiness to confront the covert and overt resistance of a system that is accustomed to rent and gratification. And I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that and accept it. The private sector is also used to a system that where there is constant gratification, rent seeking. It's an interaction that has gone on for ages. There's no one who has done business in this environment who would not appreciate that that is the truth, and that's what generally has tended to happen. And in order to reverse that, in order to stop that system, and so that things can be done properly, of course it involves a measure of doing. It involves also calling out public officials who are doing these sorts of stuff. And so it means that the private sector itself cannot say, because I want to do my own business as quickly as possible, I will not call out anybody who is seeking gratification or who is asking me for a bribe. We just got to do these things. If we don't, we'll never solve the problem. Part of the problem we have, and some of it may even be cultural, that nobody wants to report anybody. Nobody wants to report anybody. I mean, within the system, outside the system, nobody really wants to report anyone. But I think we scored a good point with the whistleblower thing, because I think the economic interest superseded the individual interest. When people saw that, okay, you'll get paid for reporting, I think they forgot all of the, the usual, I will not report, I will not be the one to bring anyone down. So we've recorded it, but we can't always do a reward system. And I think those of us in the private sector, especially seniors like those who are here today, must be prepared to work with us, especially in our anti-corruption fight, to ensure that we're able to change the way things are done, and to change the way things are done in a manner that will inure to the benefit of all of us for now and the future. The fourth also is changing the mindset of the regulator. And we've repeated this point, the regulator must not be an obstacle, the regulator must be a facilitator. And we've tried to do this through the MSME clinics. We've gone around several of the states, taking the regulators with us, NAFDAC, SOM, FRS, BOI, everyone, taking them with us. The DFI is also, BOI is one of the DFIs. I've gone around with us everywhere, looking for a way of ensuring that we're able to get the MSMEs to understand how the regulator works, and for the regulators also to be able to work closely with the MSMEs. It's led to very excellent results, I must say. We found that in several of the states we've been, the MSMEs have been very forthright as to what their problems are. In many cases, the regulators have set up in those states and in some cases revitalized their operations in those states. And it's led to a greater interaction between the regulators and the MSMEs. But again, it is, as has been repeated here, we need to change the mindset of the regulator and judge the regulator by how much they're able to do. How much service are you able to render? And we must be able to see this. And I think the point that was very well made is that we must set new KPIs for our regulators, so that the regulator also understands that this is about, in some cases, hand-holding our small businesses and our businesses to ensure that they are able to render, that they're able to do their business well and, and improve the economy generally. The NAFDAC, I think, gave a very spirited response to some of what has been, some of the criticisms have been leveled, and but we really must continue to, see these interactions as meaning that our work is far from being done, very far from being done. And I think that NAFDAC would also, would probably also accept that it is a systemic change that is required. You can point to 1,200 where 5,000 are waiting, if you see what I mean. But a systemic change is required. What we really need is to be able to hear from the private sector and from all of these people who we see every day when we go out on our MSME clinics from state to state, who are saying, yes, we can give NAFDAC 90%, we can give NAFDAC 95%. That's really where we're going. And I'm sure that you're all set to do that. The other thing I want us to also note is that in this matter of ease of doing business, we need the buy-in from the private sector in very significant ways. I listened to Dewey from SBL talking about how the MBA has worked, and this is very true indeed. The MBA, especially the SBL, has worked very closely with PEBEC and worked very closely with the government in so many different ways. But we also want to see a situation where there is much more interaction, especially with professional groups. If you look at one of the major questions that people ask, especially investors ask, local and foreign, how do you resolve cases in our courts? How long does it take? A simple dispute can last forever. And this is really the MBA. The MBA must take steps. Most judges are prepared to do cases. Most judges do not cause the delays. Delays are largely caused by us. And when I say us, I refer to lawyers. Look, there is an arbitration clause in an agreement. It means that this should go to ADR. It means it should go to arbitration. But you also know that if you challenge the arbitration clause, it can be stuck in the courts for 3 years. But there is no discipline. There is nothing that says, the NBA doesn't say you can't not challenge an arbitration clause, because you know that the whole purpose of an arbitration clause is to take this out of the court system. Nowhere else in the world do you have a situation where people do the sorts of things we do when there are clear clauses in agreements. But unless the NBA is prepared to take the disciplinary steps that are required, especially where people are engaging in dilatory tactics, and we know that those tactics are just to delay, just to hold on and hold on. There was a case of a Nigerian lawyer who works in England. He practices in England, and he had worked here for a while. He took up a case. This was a criminal case, and he lost the case in the High Court in England, and then went up to the Court of Appeal. At the Court of Appeal, the judges were hinting that he should drop the argument. And you know how it is, and the judges just hint that your position is unarguable. Hint, he refused. At the end of the case, he lost, and the Court of Appeal wrote to the Law Society to say that he should be disbarred for taking an unarguable point and resisting the hints of the Court of Appeal. So he had to come home, ask for help in every possible way. I had to write a reference. I was Attorney General at the time. Wrote a reference to say, this fellow has worked hard in Nigeria, is a good lawyer, this, etc., etc. But just to underscore the point, that in many jurisdictions, you can't take the chances that our lawyers take. You can't. This is a man who was practically disbarred for taking an unarguable point, not the kinds of delays that we engage in, where a person knows that this is going nowhere, but is ready to go all the way to the Supreme Court. So I think we must I think that especially for business, in the commercial courts, the Federal High Court, I think we must really go beyond, what we're doing at the moment, to take disciplinary steps or to do something about that. And I'm sure that and I can speak about the MBA without feeling any pinch of guilt whatsoever, especially as I stand on this side now. And but frankly, I think it's something that we have to take quite seriously. I just wanted to mention one or two other points. The airports, I watch the airports very closely, and a lot has been said about what has been done in Abuja, what we're trying to do in Lagos. But I want to say that, again, as with many public utilities, as with many public facilities, they've been neglected for a very long time. I asked Julius Berger to take a look at the Lagos airport and to assess for us what exactly the problems are, what the issues were, and all that, with a view perhaps to, opening this up for, facilities management and all of that. And after they had taken a look at the facilities, they said, look, this thing is just terrible. I mean, neglect over the years, electrical problems of every kind, leaking roofs, leaking this, leaking that, complete neglect for so many years. So obviously, we're dealing, and this is the case with most public utilities, this is the case. So it's not just a matter of saying, well, the lifts are not working. There's a fundamental problem with the entire electrical system. So as you repair this, that gets disrupted. So we need to do, first we need to do a general overhaul, which is what we're looking at. But more importantly, we need to take it out of the public sector. We need to concession those airports. Fortunately, the Federal Executive Council has approved the concessioning of the Lagos Airport, Abuja, and Kaduna. So we need to put this through an open, transparent process. So we get, the best, companies in the world to come and take a look at it and see. And obviously, this is a very attractive proposition for many, because this is a major hub. This could be a major hub for Africa, for our sub-region, and of course for Africa. So I think that there's a lot that is in process, but there's a lot that needs to be done to get to where we are. But we are taking the steps incrementally. We're trying to do as best we can with what we have at the moment, with the facilities as we have them. And I'm sure that to a certain extent we're seeing some improvements there. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is power. And I want to say that with power, our approach here has been quite dynamic. And I want us to, and I'm sure that, of course, we've taken several different comments and several different explanations have been made. But I just want to address one aspect of this. I'm sure that many of us recognize that, the problem is not really generation as such, because we have installed capacity that's more than sufficient for current needs. But more importantly, even what we are managing to generate, about 6,000 megawatts of power, it's been pointed out that about 2,000 of it is not in use or stranded, as they say. Now, what is going on? The discos are turning down power, so they're not taking as much power as is being generated. Now, that's almost paradoxical. We're in a situation where you don't even have enough power. Why is this the point? Why is this happening? There are two reasons. One is that they claim that they have collection difficulties, so they can't, collect at point of use for various reasons. Some people are unwilling to pay. They have many customers who are willing to pay. In some cases, they have, other problems. But the more important problem is the relationship between transmission and distribution to point of use. So there's a major problem with the kind of infrastructure that should have been invested in, and I must say by the DISCOs, especially from transmission to point of use. Transmission is not the current problem. It is more from transmission to from distribution to point of use. So you are talking about the 33 kV lines, and you are talking about the 33 11 kV substations that have not been invested in. Now, these investments are meant to have been done by the DISCOs. But of course, you know the DISCOs are cash-strapped and all that. So we're looking at various options. What do we need to do? First, to improve that infrastructure, especially from the distribution infrastructure to point of use, which is really, for instance, if you take a place like Osborne, I'm sure many of us who live in Lagos, look at the Osborne Estate. Just across the Osborne Estate, from the Osborne Estate, is about 250 megahertz of power. There's even a substation there. But Osborne Estate, most of them, I'm sure, use private generators. So what we need is a 33 kV line between, just across the road to Osborne Estate, on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. Can change what goes on in the Osborne Estate. And there are so many places like that all that is required is that 33 kV line, and 33 kV, in some cases 33 kV 11, the substation that's required. But in many cases, the substations are even around, are even available. So what NEC, and I believe the representative from NEC has already made the point, what they're doing with the eligible customer thing is very, very crucial, the declaration of the eligible customers. Because that's one way out of where we are. We cannot rely on what is going on at the moment as a solution. It's clear that the current system where the DISCOs are supplying all the power there is through the grid and through the available systems can't work, especially because they simply can't deliver all the power that's required. So we need the eligible customer declaration. We need eligible customers to work. We need willing buyer, willing seller programs around the entire country. That is absolutely important, and we intend to pursue that because we think that that's really what we'll need now to be able to make the quantum leap that's required. Now, what does that involve? We're looking at industrial clusters as an example. So, Ariaria market, the Kano garment market, Shomolu printing area there, and all of that, where we can have these eligible customer arrangements. So this allows a willing buyer and a willing seller. It allows, and the DISCOs themselves are going to be involved in this, but we're not going to restrict ourselves. We can't restrict ourselves to just the DISCOs in this kind of arrangement. So whoever is willing to provide the power, whoever is willing to provide, we will register them and enable them. So all sorts of off-grid initiatives are going to be, we're going to empower all sorts of off-grid initiatives because this is so important. And when you look at what industry is saying, people are saying, well, we don't want to pay more. Now, we really have to find it. We really must pay more. And one of the problems we keep talking about now is about the cost-reflective tariff. Now, I'm not too worried about or too concerned about how the R2 or R3 customers, those who cannot really afford any kind of increase will pay. I don't think we should worry ourselves too much about that or worry ourselves about tariff increases. I think that there are so many who are willing to pay, especially industry, and who should be willing to pay. And let me just explain how this works. If industry gets industry quality power consistently, today we are generating power for between 80 to 110 naira. Tariffs about 29, at least sub 30, 29, 27, 29, and all of that. If you're able to get industry quality power consistently, and you pay more for that, if you're paying 10 naira more, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But we find that industry resists any kind of increase. But my take is that is because they are not sure that the power will be industry quality and will be consistent. But where we have this willing buyer, willing seller arrangements, I'm sure that we'll be able to have the kind of quality of power that you need consistently. And secondly, it will be much, much cheaper than self-generation or private generation of power. We're also promoting, as I've said, solar power alternatives. We have about 1,000 megawatts signed up already. And there's our energizing education, which is building IPPs in universities. We're going to build IPPs in about 9 universities and the surrounding communities of those universities as part of the energizing education scheme. So these are just some of the initiatives. As I said, our approach to power is dynamic, and we have to keep it dynamic because there are changes that we're seeing every day. But we think that just pursuing the path that we have gone in the past few years is not going to work. And certainly it wouldn't deliver the kind of speed that we require that we require power now. And we think that we need to work a lot quicker and a lot smarter in order to be able to deliver the kind of power that we need for industry in particular. But let me just end by saying that ultimately what we need in order to be able to make a real difference, not just in the ease of doing business, but in our economy as a whole, is a reform movement of sorts. And this is, if you like, a collaboration between the public and private sector, but also within government, legislature, judiciary, and of course the executive and the private sector. We need to synergize. You can't persuade everyone. You can't persuade everyone that we need to get things right and do things right. And that's something I've seen in practically every reform effort that we make. But we must find a critical mass of a few serious, dedicated women and men, or men and women, a few serious and dedicated people in the private sector, in government, in the judiciary, in the legislature, who can work together to get things done. You are not going to ever be able to persuade everybody. Never. But if you found a few good people who are dedicated and committed, we can really make the changes that are required. And what I've seen is that most times when you want to make real reform, it doesn't take everybody. It really doesn't take everybody. What is required is a few people who are looking at the problems day by day and who are dedicated to it. And those people can come from everywhere. For example, even if you look at judicial reform, most times you are not going to find everybody working to enable judicial reform. You won't find all lawyers, you won't find all judges, but a handful is all that's required. And that is the same even with the legislature. You can't persuade the legislature. I mean, we work with the legislature every day. You can't persuade them to change the way that they do stuff. But there are a few people within the legislature who understand where this country ought to be going and who understand that we can't be where we are or do things in the way that we've been doing them. And they can make the difference. So we need all of these individuals, and so with the private sector. And I want to say that those of us who are here should be part of that whole change and part of that movement. People who are dedicated to seeing that we make a change in this country, that we make a real difference in the ease of doing business, because it makes sense for all of us. All of us, I mean, look, and I always say that we can't have all these smart people in this country, and we still have the problems that we have. I think it was okay, the Honourable Minister for Industry, Trade and Investment on Saturday, when we met with the Industrial and Competitiveness Council, which of course again is another private sector council. Some of those who are here were also there. And he said that if, he was referring to a particular individual, and he said that if with all of his experience and the brains that this man has, the private sector operator, he said if we can't solve the problem, then the problem must be real. And I want to say the same to you here, that if all of us seated here, plus private sectors, all the best minds, public sectors, all the best minds, okay, who used to be a doctor, transformed to a private capital person and all of that. If we can't solve the problem, then the problem must be real. But I want to say that I am confident that we will solve the problem. Thank you.